Hey, I'm AJ.
I'm Zach.
And this is Fresh Tactics.
All right, guys. So you all know I like to quote Tolkien. So this is kind of a there and back again story today. We are joined by Margaux Chan. Margaux Chan is actually someone I have over a decade experience with. When she first started her CrossFit journey, it was as an athlete at my gym, and in that time, we actually saw her go to the CrossFit Games on a team. She actually got CMS, which is candidate for Master Sport in the 20 kg long cycle, in her second appearance ever on a platform, and actually had athletics as a large part of her life that she probably will mention too, including college field hockey, right? We don't call it lacrosse. Do we call it lacrosse? We call it,
yeah.
Okay, excuse me.
Both wear skirts. Pretty much the same thing.
If my buddy Mike was here, he'd get real pissed. I mess that up all the time. But believe it or not, I know we have AJ on here, and she seems very smart. AJ's actually gone in the Yukon for a wedding. Maybe she won't be back. But I will say that Margaux is one of the smartest people I know. And from the time I've met her, she has now become Dr. Chan. So I'm sure she's going to be able to kind of flesh that out a little bit. Because I was like, how do I introduce you? Like, what are we doing here? And she's like, you can call me this or that. But like, doctor sounded really good, you know?
Oh, yeah.
Because, you know, it's a good title. And there's a lot of people that like say they're a doctor, but like they're not really a doctor. You're like a real doctor. You're not like I'm not going to knock anybody that's, you know, doctor-ish.
I like to say PhDs are the real doctors, but I'm a physician. I'm a resident physician. So for those of your listeners that, you know, like to watch Grey's Anatomy or The Resident or The Good Doctor, those are all residents. So
I was an ER kid.
Yes, George Clooney.
Watched a lot of that.
Yeah.
A lot of that ER. It was good.
Formative years.
I like the bald dude with the glasses too.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Man, the cancer got him. That was fucking sad. That shit got me hard. So let's play a little catch up, because you and I have been in contact via Messenger and stuff like that. You have been all over the place getting educated, becoming a doctor. But like, just so everyone kind of get a feel for you, I gave you a little bit of an intro, but like, what is kind of your sports background, and like what got you here?
Yeah. So I was always one of the. Kevin's trying to give me sign language. I need to put my.
I can't wait to watch this video, because you are
so. I'm doing like Ricky Bobby thing.
Awkwardly moving around right now.
Pull the mic closer to me, closer to my mouth.
I highly recommend to anybody that listens to this to watch the video. Okay.
All right. So, you know, I played lacrosse in high school. Decided, you know, it's a great way to make sure I maintain some semblance of physical activity in college.
What high school did you go to again?
I went to Holy Names Academy.
That's right.
In Seattle, Washington.
Holy
it is
Names.
An all-girls Catholic school. Did its very best to keep me out of trouble, and almost succeeded. So anyway, I went to another Catholic school for college. I went to Santa Clara University. It's a Jesuit school just outside of San Jose in California. And I played lacrosse there for 4 years. And when I got home, after graduation, I didn't really know what to do with myself. And my sister, Michelle, actually told me, hey, there's this gym opening up just down the street. It was CrossFit West Seattle. And she kind of dragged me along reluctantly, and the rest is history. We kind of got sucked right on in. I saw that there were kettlebells there. I'd seen some kettlebells in conditioning training for lacrosse, and I was like, yes, that I recognize. I don't recognize this other stuff. I didn't do much barbell lifting. I didn't do much, you know, nothing with wall balls or anything, but I knew if there were kettlebells there, I could probably handle myself. So it was a good little.
So a little backtrack on the lacrosse. So did you go there for lacrosse, or was it because it was the Catholic school? Because little known fact, I actually looked at that school because they had a wrestling program.
Yeah.
And I definitely would have been kicked out. I definitely wouldn't. It would have been a horrible experience for me.
I did not go specifically for lacrosse, but I was very happy that they did have a lacrosse team there that I could try out for.
And you're just like, I've been in the Northwest, and I got to get out of here.
It was, my brother and my sister both went to UW, and so they told me we have kind of a little bit of a helicopter mom, and so they thought I would do a little better being outside the nest for a while. So that was there.
And funny enough, actually, Margaux grew up 2 miles, 3 miles down from where I grew up.
Oh yeah. Zach, we met long before we actually met in the CrossFit gym.
Right.
Yeah, at
Maggie.
Mary Ogletree.
Oh, shit,
Mary
Mary
Ogletree's
Ogletree.
house. She was my best friend growing up. Hi, Mary. She now has she's married. She has a beautiful little baby.
Oh, no shit.
Yeah. It was the Z Boys. It was Zephyr and Zach. I remember they brought frogs into the playhouse.
Yep.
One day. I was like,
Mullets and long hair.
Yeah, that's right.
And now
I was
I'm
like
rocking
6 years old.
I'm rocking the mohawk now.
There it is. This is the full circle. Starting out with the Tolkien reference.
Yep.
We're really coming full circle.
This was not my choice. It just happened, and now I'm kind of going with it. I think
not your choice. You hear this?
I'm kind of owning it. No, it wasn't my choice. I have this fantastic barber I go to named Evie. He's this French African dude. He's so suave, and he was cutting my hair, and I went to teach a couple courses. I was in Paris, and then I was in Italy. And when I was in transitioning between the two, I was in Rome, and it was so freaking hot because it was right at the beginning of their heat wave that my hair was just a curly mess, and I was like, I'm ready to shave it off. And I came back, I'm like, listen, bro, I like what you're doing with my hair, but we got to change it because it's just too wild. And then he's like, don't shave it, don't shave it. I'm like, well, do something. And next thing I know, he starts like taking the sides off. I'm like, you're shaving it, like you're shaving it. And then
he knew it was best for you.
The next thing I knew, I had a mohawk. And he's like, oh yeah, wait till the back grows out. I'm like, the back grows out? Like, we're gonna go in. Okay.
All right. Okay, I believe you now.
Yep, exactly. So, funny enough, you mentioned CrossFit West Seattle. I think it was a month ago. We had our 10-year affiliate there.
Oh my gosh.
I know, right? This will be actually a fun podcast for AJ to listen to. Because she loves to reference what is called the Attitude Era, but she wasn't part of the Attitude Era.
The Attitude Era.
That was the original coach, my original coach. That's what it's called. It's called the Attitude Era.
Excellent.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, like that kind of like in your face, this is what we do. Mm-hmm. And she'll be like, oh, so-and-so is part of the Attitude Era. I'm like, no, that they have no idea what the Attitude Era is. Like it's totally like way
that is
away
a
from
beautifully coined phrase.
Well, it was all like 50 rep squat maxes and all this shit.
Yeah. What is that, Smolov? We did like Smolov stuff too.
We went above Smolov. We took Russian volume templates and we changed them.
He says we, like it was, we were just these little disciples following and like, oh, you want me to just squat 50 times? Yeah. Okay.
This is what changed the whole This is why like, CFKB has now become RX, and there's this whole methodology behind it because I had all you guys to.
I like how you just combined methodology and mythology because that actually is it's a perfect combo of the two.
All the time. It's like saying specific.
It's like the legendariness of the origins of this whole empire is, anyway. Yeah.
Well, and you were a big part of it. Yeah, you and your sister rolled in there and had no idea what you're going to do. There was actually a hole in the wall at CrossFit West Seattle for a long time from when I had said, Margaux, you can kick up into a handstand. And you're like, no, I can't. I'm like, yeah, just here, let me show you. You do this. And then you just barrel roll.
That was the beginning and arguably the end of my illustrious gymnastics career. Right
into the wall. Put a hole in it.
Yeah,
it was right underneath the whiteboard, so it was always there.
Yeah, it was a fixture. It was
a garage gym. Like it's like where we're at right now. It's at Hinge.
Hardcore.
Yeah, like I don't care. Like someone's like, "Oh, are you gonna cover the plywood with drywall?" I'm like, "Fuck no, it's a garage gym. This whole place is gonna be, plywood by a certain point." But so. As we're filling you guys in on this whole topic, I'm sure there's some people that are just going to love to hear. I'm sure that this will be a wildfire with that old crew. Like, they actually did a podcast, and people are going to be holding their breath. Like, what are they going to say? Like, don't worry, guys. We're actually here to talk about real things, all right? So at a certain point in Margaux's training, she kind of was the beginning of like what has become our internship process. And I don't know how familiar you are with what our internship process has become, but we have this professional internship process. And it's something that like AJ really had to buckle down and write out a whole syllabus for, because it was part of the way that she was able to get into the country. She's like, I'm doing this work thing, and she's like, he has this whole thing, and we wrote it out, and it is. And now we've had a couple of people finish out their college degrees with us and stuff like that.
Holy
so
smokes.
yeah. So it's gone pretty big. Just outside of that, but we have like the coaches that we work with abroad and do all the mentoring. But it kind of started with you. And because you were like, yeah, I like, as Margaux mentioned, I like kettlebells. Like, I like them a lot, you know? Like, sweet. Like, let's work on that. And you did the first Iron 101 with me. That picture popped up the other day. I had a T-shirt on that said "Crunked for Christ," which someone had given to me, and I like cut the sleeves off, and I was rocking it like Hulk Hogan, and that was what I taught that initial course in, because we were that's what we were. That was our life. Not like it was like Crunked for Christ. It was just like, look at this ridiculous shirt I have, and this is what we're doing right now. But that was our first like little mini 2-hour kettlebell course, and that was before we interned with Jeff, right?
I believe that is correct. I don't remember
because I saw a picture,
total.
and I think the board literally said RKC style kettlebelling on
yes,
it at
yes,
the gym.
Learning position. Learning position.
Yeah, I think we did. Oh, fuck, we did.
I know you did learning position.
Yeah.
I remember. Yeah. So, essentially I started CrossFit with my sister, loved it. Kettlebells were just like a recurring theme of, I dig this. I can do it I don't have to, like move around. There wasn't moving from point A to point B. It was, I'm going to stand here and I'm going to move this weight. And I'm all about that, because I'm less about the gymnastics and the cardio.
Stationary
and more about,
lifter.
Yes,
Stationary lifter. Yeah.
And so I basically, I think I came to you and I was like, hey, like I want to do more of this. And you had told me I should go basically learn from Jeff.
Yeah. Well, Jeff was doing the 5-day tactical athlete course. I was going to go do that, and it started with the 2-day kettlebell course. So I was able to not go to that. So I was like, get your ass on a plane, fly to Tennessee. This guy is very unique.
This was Jonesboro, Georgia.
Oh, fuck, that's right.
This was Jonesboro, Georgia. Yeah.
I forgot about that.
This is like a 45-minute drive outside of Atlanta.
So I was in Tennessee like a month ago, and I was trying to figure out where the biggest drive-through in the country was. Do you remember
Varsity,
that?
The Varsity.
The
I
Varsity.
remember.
She's got this thing, Kevin, where she like looks up like stupid landmarks, and it was, we're gonna go to the biggest drive-in in the world, and it was like Georgia, and it's like 2 hours away, and I was having like a full-blown like allergy attack, so I was all snotty, and she like got me up, and she's like, this is gonna be great, we're gonna have so much fun, and I'm sitting in the car miserable, and I'm pissed, and we get there, and it was like Dick's. It was like Dick's Burgers.
Yeah, it was.
It was like Dick's Burgers, and it was like shakes, and they weren't that good, and then it was like 2 hours back in the car of silence and just me like trying to breathe.
Yeah.
It was, but that was when you went out to go meet Jeff.
If you can't see right now, he's knife handing me. Yeah. He's just so.
But the thing that was flattering about that was I hadn't seen Jeff since I had done my 2-day course, and you text me and you were like, oh, Jeff's excited for when you show up. He's like, oh yeah, Zach. And he actually does remember. He has a very bad memory. Like the order of the course and stuff, but he'll be like,
he has a very selective memory.
He'll remember people from courses. He's like, oh yeah, like that guy, right? And I'm like, why do you remember that? And yet you can't remember, not to make that inappropriate joke that I told you 18 times not to make, and you keep doing it. But so we went out to the tactical athlete course, which is actually a fantastic course. They don't really do it anymore. I had gymnastics and stuff, but that was kind of your thing. And for me, it was a big thing, because you were going to be in front of Jeff and I wasn't going to be there, and he was going to kind of see your lifting that I had taught you. And when I got there, you said you'd done great. So that was a big part of it. But also while we were there, Jeff had been talking about this trip to Russia. Now I was just mentioning the biggest drive-in in the country or whatever. So then Margaux got in her mind that we needed to go to Russia. So, yes, that was our next big adventure. First, it was Georgia, Do you remember when we went to the barbecue place with like the gruel slop?
Do I ever? So I think we should probably paint the picture of Jonesboro for those who have not had the privilege, really, of traveling there.
People should go.
So I believe it was about 45 minutes outside of Atlanta. I remember we driving out, and this was, not very different from now in that coffee was like an essential part of our pre-workout routine. And right. Trying to find a cup of coffee was next to impossible. I think we ended up going to a grocery store and getting some like instant coffee or Folgers or something like that because there just wasn't a place nearby.
It was worse.
What?
Do you remember what happened?
No.
We went to some store, like you said, and we got these weird sandwiches, and we had offered Jeff coffee. And we forgot Jeff's coffee.
Oh, no.
So we rolled back in with coffee, and he's like, what?
Oh,
no. Wait, where's my coffee? And we were like...
no wonder I don't remember. I definitely just pushed that back into the coffers.
Totally did not get Jeff coffee.
Okay.
And I was like, he hates us.
Yeah.
He hates us so much. And everybody in there was like, all, because it was also like, this place was also like a shooting range.
Yeah, it was like almost like I hesitate to call it like a police training facility, but it was like a combat. They had
did
the
live
whole,
shoots,
they
yeah.
had live shooting stuff. They had like a whole, they reproduced like basically a structural whatever, so people could go in and they could practice, and now it's all coming back to me now. So we really were. It was an emergency to get Coach some coffee,
and we were the odd people out.
And we were the odd people out. And so we asked, and I can't believe I'm forgetting his name now, but we asked the local guy who was kind of our liaison, who was, ran the facility, I believe. And trusty Google showed me that there was a pool hall down the road. And I was like, oh, I bet we could get a cup of coffee at the pool hall. And so we, going up like, hey, I see the pool. Do you think we could get a cup of coffee over there? And he's like, do not go to the pool hall.
Right.
I cannot help you in the pool hall.
Yeah, because he was a sheriff too, and he was like, he was knife handing. Do not go to the pool hall.
Yeah.
I am not coming in the pool hall. Ain't nobody coming to save you in the pool hall. Because we were young.
Yeah.
This was 10 years ago. We were dumb kids. But so in those 2 days that I left you alone with Jeff, which was a mistake, he had mentioned Russia, and you would not let Russia go as soon as I got to Georgia, which I thought was Tennessee, which is funny. Tennessee was when we did the advanced course.
Yes.
Georgia was different. So we were there, and you're like, Richie was there too.
Richie was there.
But you were like, there's this thing in Russia and we should go to it. So what did Jeff explain to you about Russia? Because this changed, and this is actually, we want to talk about some scientific stuff on this thing, and me and Margaux are definitely going to do a lot of catching up, so who knows how much that we get into. But this was a huge shift in everything, the way I viewed programming, the way I did, anything that I had thought that I had a dialed in. Russia definitely changed. Now, the idea of getting there first was a monumental task because I had only ever been in Mexico, and the idea of going to Russia was stupid. Now, the romantic picture of Russia was painted in your head. So how did Jeff put that in your head?
I think it was actually, he mentioned it in passing. So it was an awesome course in that we did some, I would call it didactic stuff, like some lecture, actually, where he was kind of talking about theory, talking about the basis of techniques that he was teaching, and kind of what influenced what he was doing and why he thought the way he did. And he had mentioned that he went to Russia, trained with these guys who, if your listeners are unaware, Russia is kind of considered the motherland of the kettlebell, and so he basically focused on this idea, or mentioned this idea that it was more focused on efficiency, that it actually is a sport, and they have competitions, and pretty much left it at that, and kind of went more into the S&C side of stuff. But I thought it was just the coolest thing that he went and he learned from the people who have been doing it for decades, right? And where it was originally created. And so kind of asked him about how we might be able to make that happen, if, you know, who you need to be in order to go do an experience like that. And so he kind of told me, here's who you need to talk to in order to learn the techniques to get good enough to go. And that was that.
Well, yeah, and it was interesting too, because Jeff had been out to one of these camps, there ended up being a little bit of a, just like any organization, like powerlifting stuff, there ended up being fracturing, but there was this kind of golden, I wouldn't say era, because it only lasted 18 months where I feel like all the lifters were together. Like they were under one flag and they were working together.
Everybody except Fedorenko. So WKC and the IKFSA.
And by default, Denisov.
Yes.
So those guys obviously not, but there was this big group of lifters that was like coming together. It was really cool, and we weren't that familiar with that. And in fact, when I showed up at the tactical athlete camp, and Jeff's like, "Oh yeah, our stuff looks good," and I started watching you. I was like, "Well, why is Margaux lifting like that?" And Jeff had changed it. He does that all the time. He changes it. He's like, "This is how we do it. You got to update the software, Zach." I'm like, "You don't update the software without telling people." So I was like, "What's this all about?" And like we're in the hotel room. Margaux was like telling me about it, and then she's like, "And then guess what?" And you guys won't be able to see this if you're listening, so you should definitely watch. Like puts her arm in my armpit and goes like this. Like she always did that. She's like super excited. She's like, "Guess what? We can go to Russia." And I was like, "We're in Georgia." Where did Russia come from? Like, where did that idea come from? And then she was like, the sport lifters, the video, like we had watched some videos of sport lifting. And it didn't really resonate with me. I didn't, like, I was just kind of watching it and I'd do it. And I was like, this is difficult. And
it looked like I think after I had kind of done a little more research, I actually wrote like a little blog post, I remember, on the original blog. And I remember describing it as dance-like. It looked like dancing to me almost. It was just like this flowy, super efficient kind of like, I know flow has a whole kind of connotation now. But yeah, it was like a foreign thing. And I think we were like, what the heck?
Yeah, it was totally different.
It was totally different.
And the athletes themselves looked different. They didn't look like, they didn't look like these big buff dudes. I mean, Denisov's a big old ogre. He's a big man. And, like Dennis, he's still a skinny dude. Like, silly. I might be pronouncing it wrong, whatever. But he was still a pretty skinny dude, even though he was kind of jacked. But they're not that big. And I was accused of being too big to be a sport lifter.
Right.
But so Jeff's like, yeah, we're gonna, he was like talking to Margaux about it, and then Margaux was laying it to me, and I kind of mentioned it to him. He's like, oh yeah, there's gonna be a thing coming up, and it seemed like a pipe dream to me. It seemed like very far out there, and I wasn't as close with Jeff until we were sitting in the programming lecture. Do you remember this? I still tell this fucking story.
Tell it again.
We're sitting in the programming lecture. It's like AJ's favorite fucking story. We're sitting in the programming lecture, and Jeff didn't really address programming per se. He had a coaching module, which is actually really good, and we're doing this new journeyman program where he's going to do that, where he talks about like auditory and kinesthetic and all the different styles of learning that you go through teaching people.
Sure.
But the programming itself, there wasn't templates, there wasn't anything. I'm like, what am I supposed to walk out of here with? And somebody asked that question, and they're like, well, where do we find this? And he's like, I don't know. Is there like maybe there's like a website or something out there? And then at that time we had our website, and it was kind of like a privatized blog. All of a sudden you start kicking me under the table, and I was like, don't fucking do it. Just shut up. And you kept kicking, and I was like, stop. We're not going to do this. We're not going to be students and then stand up and say we're the ones that know what we're talking about. And so I looked at you, I was like, no. And Jeff's like, yeah, well, maybe. And Margaux just goes, I know. And I was like, oh, fuck. And so we explained briefly what we did there. And Jeff wrote it down. Everyone in the class wrote it down. And that was Jeff's kind of foray into realizing that I had an understanding of not just the movements, but how to actually get the movements into programs in the gyms, and into more so into CrossFit from that standpoint. So that's the groundwork of where we were in Georgia.
Mm-hmm.
We're gonna fast forward here.
Okay.
we're fast forwarding. So you kind of handled this. Like I was like, we're not gonna make it to Russia. This is stupid. We're in West Seattle. I'm a West Seattle kid. Like that ain't happening. Like I ain't going to Russia. You're crazy. It's like baby's kids. I ain't going overseas to Russia. But then all of a sudden you got a hold of Corrigan, right?
Yeah. So Tom Corrigan actually was at the same camp that Jeff was at. And so Jeff knew that Tom was in the Northwest, and he actually was out at level 4 CrossFit at the time.
And before I don't want to interrupt you. So when we say camp, there had been, when Jeff had gone to Russia, there had been a meeting of the minds, and these lifters had gotten together with a bunch of who's, and Jeff had been at the inaugural one.
Right.
And there was going to be another one coming up, and that was kind of maybe we can make it into that. So then Jeff said, get a hold of Corrigan. And I completely forgot that we didn't mention there actually had been another camp.
Yeah,
it was like, we're just going to go walk around Russia and find people lifting bells.
Right,
it wasn't like that.
Yeah. So Tom, I kind of got in touch with him because I don't think I'd ever even lifted with an actual competition bell at that time. Yeah. And they were and so he had a stockpile of those, and he was even drilling holes in the bottom of them to make, specific kgs and that sort of thing. And anyway, so I worked with him a couple times, and he kind of showed me the ropes of it. And at a point where I felt comfortable enough to defend my honor in an application, I applied to the IKFSA website. And so essentially that whole process, I think you facilitated for me, because I was just a rando kind of emailing.
Well, you needed to have a reference letter, I believe.
Yes.
Because Tom was yours, right? Mm-hmm. Jeff was mine.
Yeah.
You needed a reference letter. You needed like a resume.
Yeah.
And then you needed a video.
You needed
submission.
a video. Yeah.
You needed a video submission, and mine was like me overhead squatting and doing all these big lifts and acting like general
hooligan
maniac. Yeah. Like, I don't know why the fuck they let me into the camp. But so we're like, okay, well, here's our stuff, because I didn't know how to put the YouTube shit together.
Right.
So we got it all together and we sent it in, and fucking right away, I got a response.
Yeah.
You're going to Russia.
Yeah.
I was like, and I was like, I texted you, I was like, Margaux, did you get your thing? Or I have to go to Russia. And it wasn't like I get to go to Russia. I was like, I have to go to Russia. And you're like, no, I haven't heard. And I was like, what do you mean you haven't heard? Like, why haven't you heard yet? And I'm like, what was in the letter that, your reference sent?
Right.
And knowing Tom, it was probably like over the top of like just a young person, very inexperienced, needs to know, like, find her way in the world. And now that I know him, I'm sure it was like that. And it didn't sound grandiose, like, oh, this is the person that should be there. And this is all going to make sense here in a minute, guys. But like, we stayed at it. I feel like I wrote a letter to
you. I think we basically did the equivalent of hammer texting via email.
Yeah, we lobbied.
Yeah, we
I
lobbied.
That. Well, and also but I owned a gym at the time, and I had been coaching.
Right, I was just a rando out of Clear Blue.
Yeah, you were a little new. So, but the whole time I was sweating it, because I was like, well, if she ain't going, I ain't going. I don't fucking go over to Russia by myself. I mean, Jeff supposedly was going to be there. Mm-hmm. There was a lot of like, I might be there.
Yeah.
But finally we got the thing, and it was like, okay, boom, you're good. You guys get to go.
Then the real fun started.
Yeah, the real fun was like, I had no idea about visas and shit.
Yeah, so we, I love that kind of background shit, the paperwork stuff, getting all that organized, flight, hotel, no problem. It's getting the visa that was the bigger burden, or barrier, excuse me. So anyway, so I remember we went down to there's a consulate, or it was an embassy or consulate, I can't remember, but anyway.
It's a consulate, I've had to go back to it since then.
Consulate, yeah. So it's downtown Seattle. How convenient.
In the middle of, it's just like in this little building. Like, you wouldn't think that's where the Russians are, but that's where they are.
That's where they are. So we took our bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, took our passports down there, and little did I know, and it's so funny. I talked to someone else who had a similar experience because I look somewhat like maybe have some Mongolian ancestry. So, you know, we go, and first of all, there's like this payment issue. They don't take credit card. We have to either do cash or check, and we don't have checks. And, you know, then we had to go downstairs to this shady thing and basically do a check transaction where they like, I still to this day, I'm not 100% sure what happened.
I remember that we went up there and they were like, they looked at me like, you're good.
Yeah.
And they looked at you and they're like, I don't know. And then they took our fucking passports.
They took our passports for a couple weeks, actually.
Yeah, a couple weeks.
A couple weeks.
It's a long time.
Yeah. So, you know.
Weeks, man.
Yeah, a couple weeks.
Yeah. And they went in this back room. Well, and first, like, you're not painting the picture. Like, it looks like a bank teller.
Yes. Yeah.
Like this, like,
there's
tiny.
The bulletproof glass type
situation.
situation.
It's like a 4x4 room with one person sitting there. And it only opens, if you remember this, for like 90 minutes. You remember? It was like from like 12:30 to like 2.
Yeah.
And we were there, and like, so we were waiting there at 12:30, and then remember, like, a line of people like just go into this back room, like they all just like filter in. They all have like their fake briefcase, like I'm here to do work, and like they just like 15 people disappear into the back, and then this person sits down. They're just like, who are you?
Yeah.
I hate you.
Yeah.
That was pretty much what it was.
So we basically were like, we may or may not ever get our passports back, but just hoped for the best. Handed over. I think we had to pay them like $190 or something.
Oh,
like
yeah.
It was kind of a lot.
They ran a racket on us.
Yeah, eventually I think we got a call or something that, hey, okay,
Yeah.
come on down. Went to go pick them up, and the visas looked super cool.
Yeah.
Like it's a big old sticker thing that's in. I still have it. It's awesome.
I had to get a new one. So
Well.
no.
Yeah, so that was kind of like the last big hoop we had to go through, and
That was the last big thing, and then we had to get on a fucking plane.
Yeah,
and we had to fly over there, and I'd never flown that far in my life. And you can just like fall asleep anywhere, and I don't. I've gotten better about it since I've had to travel so much more internationally. But like, I was just sitting on this plane awake, fucking hating it.
Yeah.
Fucking hating it. Just like, and keep like checking like, when are we gonna get there?
Yeah.
I'm fucking pissed. The drink cart wasn't really coming around. I
Right.
didn't know like you could just like request it.
Right.
I've learned these things in my travels now, but at that time I was like, this is the worst. And then we arrived in Russia. And that in itself, we got picked up. Rachinsky picked us up.
Yes, Rachinsky showed up in a super badass sweatsuit. He had this just the coolest sweatsuit on. He had a man satchel as well. And if you haven't, and I don't know if he still wears his facial hair like this, but he has some of the most creative beard art I think I've ever seen. So that pretty much set the tone for the rest of, I
was like, who is this guy? And then I think I'm getting the name right. We were riding with David Elkins. I think that's his name.
David Elkins. David Elkins had he had the type of glasses on that has the strap in the back, and not like Croakies, not like East Coast, I'm going to go boating Croakies. He had the super tight, whatever.
Wasn't going to lose those glasses.
Wasn't going to lose those glasses. If he was going to be in like a 1994 NBA game, he would have been ready.
Crushing
no
it.
broken noses. Like he was set. I think he also had a sweatband on.
Yes.
Potentially. Yeah.
Why he had it. And then he was talking about, do you remember he was talking about?
No.
He would paint like pictures of the lifters on bells. Yeah.
That part I don't remember.
Yeah. He was like, I did one for you, Sergey. And Sergey's like, But and it's funny. So I was watching this, I don't know if it's a Food Network or it's like Food Everywhere. I don't really watch these shows very often, but there was one about Russia, and it was about this guy like reclaiming Russian cuisine because it sucks. But as they were watching it, they were like, yeah, everyone in Russia eats sushi. Do you remember that? Like when we were there, David Elkins is like, he's like, I would like you to take me to get traditional Russian food. And Sergey goes, sushi. And he's like, no, I want traditional. We eat sushi. That's what we eat. We eat sushi. Sushi is Russian food. And I was just like sitting in the car. I was like, where are we? And then it straight turned into fucking Mad Max because we were going to get on the freeway and he passes the dude on like the shoulder.
We got to back up for a second. So we get into this. I mean, it wasn't a Peugeot, but it was probably the equivalent of a hamster ball. And we pile into the back.
And that was Big Zach then.
It's pouring down rain.
Oh,
it's
right.
pouring down rain. And yes, Rachinsky passed someone on the shoulder on the left, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was.
And then it was on.
It was on.
It was totally on. They're like, this is what we're doing. But so we're giving you all the backstories here. I could tell you all kinds of stories about Jeff making friends with all the other lifters because which I won't get too much into, but the hotel that we stayed in, because everybody was staying in the same hotel, rock music and all, was the fact that we got there and it looked like Jason Bourne's like hotel. Like you'd see him like jumping down the stairway because they're like, oh, there's an elevator. You don't take the elevator. You take the stairs, and it's just like and like there's big chain, like everything. It looked like the doors like you see in like Compton. You got like bang 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 to get in on it.
Yeah.
I'm like, this place is.
And my sister loaned us.
Down.
My sister is like the packing queen. She loaned us the hugest suitcase of all
Yes.
time, and so that was
We drug that bitch all the way up.
Mm-hmm.
And then we got up there. Oh God, it was so hot too. So I'm sure other people that are listening to this are gonna probably be like, of course, Zach. There's seasons in the world.
Mm-hmm.
In my head, Russia is cold.
Yeah, it's the Arctic,
It's
right?
fucking cold. There's bears and there's Ivan Drago and
Mm-hmm.
Rockies running up mountains. It's fucking cold. St. Petersburg's built on a swamp.
Yes.
So it's hot. It's fucking muggy.
Mm-hmm.
And like this, Soviet era hotel we were in was the worst. So when we got in it, we're just like, it's so hot, we gotta throw the windows open. So we threw the windows open and we went down to go stay with everybody. Like everybody was gonna meet for dinner. We met a bunch of the lifters. Jeff made a fantastic impression. It was great. But then we went back up to the room, and do you remember? It was completely full of mosquitoes.
Oh.
I mean, big fucking Russian mosquitoes, the biggest fucking things you could, like, imagine the size like a big black fly you'd see. That was the mosquito. So then we just started like walking around smacking them.
I would say conservatively there were at least 50 in there. It was like they were just lining the walls. And later on, so two brothers, Michael Salemi and Sebi Salemi, were also there. And they had the brilliant idea, or I think it was Mike had the brilliant idea. He turned the light on in his bathroom in the night, so all of them would go into the bathroom, and then he shut the door. And I was like, God, why haven't we been friends sooner? Like, I wish I would have known about that, because I woke up the next day like I had the chicken pox. I was absolutely covered in mosquito bites, and I actually got really sick.
You did.
I got really sick. I think my body was just like, inflammation. And so anyway, so that made for a
Your
very,
lips are like,
like,
look at me.
yeah, I know. I
was like, oh girl.
I was like probably 2 steps away from anaphylaxis, but it was totally fine. It made for a very interesting first couple days of camp. And we made it through. That's really the.
You know what I just remembered? I had a broken wrist at camp.
You did have a broken wrist. Yes, you did.
You just every day you tape that thing.
Every day I taped it. I happened to have worked in the athletic training room at Santa Clara. Yeah, and so I had learned how to do, like ankle tapes, wrist tapes, some of your basic stuff. And so thank God, because I remember we taped you up every day. And I remember we didn't even do pre-wrap on you, because it was like, because after 8 hours of lifting, that thing just is shredded. So you have to have a good foundation. And so I remember we were just doing straight up tape on your hand. So that was, I remember that now.
Yeah. I had forgot. I put that out of my brain that I had a broken wrist. I had to just keep that thing blunted up. So yes, we get there. I have a broken wrist. Margaux potentially needs an EpiPen because the mosquitoes literally ate her alive. And we were on a good start to our Russia trip. So we got up in the morning because everybody was staying in the same place, and we go down, and breakfast was given to us in this little white thing, and we open it up, and I shit you not, man. It was 2 pieces of white bread and a piece of Swiss cheese, and then it was 2 pieces of white bread and a piece of ham and a pickle, and that was breakfast.
Yeah.
And I was like, what the fuck is this? Like, I'm fucking starving.
Yeah.
They're like, it's breakfast. And I'm like, can I put this together like a Big Mac, or is it going to be rude? Do I have to eat it as 2 separate things? And don't be touching my pickle because I need that sodium content right now because I'm not going to make it because it's a swamp and I'm sweating my ass off. We also found out that coffee's not a big thing there. They're much more of a tea people. And I think we made it like 2 days without coffee before the entire crew like rallied and was pissed. They're like, you need to get us coffee. Like everybody at the thing was pissed. So we load up into like a tour group thing because it's like 10, 12-hour days. Like you get up, you get on the bus takes you to this like kind of weird mega gym. And we were like lifting on like hardwood. Like the whole thing was weird. We get there and there's a bunch of like the best, arguably some of the best kettlebell lifters in the world teaching this course. And I don't really know any of them. They're like, allow us to introduce, this is Sergey Rachinsky, Sergey Merkulin, Sergey, what was the big one's name?
Mishin.
Sergey Mishin and Sergey Rudnev. It was Sergey, and Sergey. And I was like, what the fuck?
And I think some of the background of this too is that they did have some interpreters for us, English interpreters. And so that the coaches would kind of go into this, what looked like a very detailed diatribe on some of the intricacies of the techniques that they were teaching us. And the interpreter would just be like, yes, he says, lift better. Yeah. And I'm like, yeah, okay.
Be better. You do good.
Do better.
But like the thing there too is, was Jeff there the first day or he showed up?
He wasn't. He showed up a little later.
He did. So we walk into that room and we mentioned the Salimi brothers were there and then Ian Tan.
Yeah.
Have you seen it? He's been killing it. He's got that ritual thing he does.
Yeah, it looks super cool.
Yeah, I know. God, there was another Mook.
Yeah.
Me and Mook
Hong Kong sexy.
Yeah, him and me stay in contact. That dude, he's all over the place. Yeah. I love that guy. He's like, I'm in Thailand now. You should come out here and we can do like a vacation, like kettlebell thing. And I'm like, okay, tell me the dates. He's like, you know what? I'm not there anymore. I had to beat feet real quick. Nice. He's like a bandit, man. He's always out. But so there was 4 other younger kids besides us. But then it was like a fucking who's who of kind of the kettlebell industry there. And I was like, what did we just get ourselves into? And what was happening at the second one was, as we said, they were trying to like tie everybody together. So like Steve Cotter and Ken Blackburn of the IKFF were out there. And then there were some other people and they were trying to get some unification in sport lifting and really push out IKSFA as the next big thing. And there I am. They're like, what's your background? I'm like, I CrossFit. I'm a CrossFit guy, you know? And they were like, what are you doing here, man? Like they all were like sport. They were like hardcore sport for life.
And that was before the time when it was kind of a bad word to be a CrossFitter, you know, and they didn't, at that time, people didn't really see it as an opportunity to get their sport out there. Same with, you know, with Olympic lifting, it was more of just a,
bastardization of everything good in the fitness industry.
Right.
It was horrible. Everybody was doing everything incorrect. That was pretty much what that was looked at as. Right. That and horrible form and American swings and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
So it was kind of weird. But when Jeff showed up the next day, then we kind of got back in line. But like Jason Dolby was there. He gave me a lot of, because he was American, so he could, and been through the course before, so he was a lot better at like kind of communicating some of the intricacies of what was going on. I'm like, well, bro, I'm here to learn. Like, tell me what's going on.
Yeah.
And then Jeff showed up and things got going. But man, I remember when they first started. They had us. They gave some big speech. I didn't really get it all. And then like they cleaned bells up in the rack and we started talking. They made us like do like a 10-minute fucking
Oh,
rack
yeah.
hold. It was the worst. I fucking hated it.
Yeah.
And of course I grabbed 24s because that's the weight you grab. And then unbeknownst to me, they were 26s. They had a little black tag on them. So they were even heavier. And we also had like, there was no food that we wanted to eat. So we went to little stores and there was like,
so
dried fish and shit.
it definitely, I think there were some organized meals, but I think we went to like a little corner grocery store type place, and I think I ended up packing us some sandwiches and stuff
Do you
like
remember
that.
what the organized meals were?
I remember what they looked like. I do not remember what.
It was pasta.
Yeah.
They were like, oh, there's an Italian restaurant downstairs. We're going to go do that. We were doing 9-hour lifting sessions.
Yeah.
The last thing I wanted to do was eat a bunch of fucking pasta. And at this point too, jet lag was kicking in. My wrist was broken. You know, you were going down. I was like, what are we doing here? I was like, I'm not learning anything. We had this conversation.
You were also still trying to run things on the back end for your affiliate. So like you were still trying to post stuff on the blog. You were still trying to make sure programming was running smoothly, answer questions from people that are, you know, on the ground at home and that sort of thing. So I think you definitely were pretty stressed out. It was stressful. Stressful couple of days. And after the first, couple of days of all day lifting, I remember, so Sean Mosen, Agatsu.
Oh yeah, Sean was there.
Sean was there with Kim. And I remember his hands by the third day, I think his hands were just like hamburger. Yep. And they had an expert at that gym, as quote unquote expert in hand care, to take care of, any major injuries that we had. And, Sean went to them with this hamburger hands, and they literally took a razor blade and cut away all the extraneous tissue from around the major issues, so that it doesn't snag on anything anymore and that sort of thing. And I remember him coming to tell us, like, so here's the deal. And he was like, you know what? I think I made a really good impression though, because Sean is Canadian.
I think he's like Quebecois.
Yeah, Quebecois.
Yeah.
And he was just like, by the end of it, they were like, these Canadian, they're not pussy. Yeah. They're not pussy. They can. Yeah.
Not very strong. Not very strong, but he's no pussy. He's no pussy.
He's not a pussy.
Yeah, because Sean's also like a comedian. He's like, he wears a bunch of hats. He did MMA commentary, he owns Agatsu. Yeah. Does all that stuff. He's actually a pretty funny dude. I was watching some IG video of him the other day about influencers. I was like, oh, get it, Sean. Just fucking go for it. It's fucking hilarious. But yeah, we started settling in. A couple days was, getting used to it. Like we said, it was really long days. It was like fucking 8-9 hours of lifting. And then they wanted to drag us out to sightsee. Mm-hmm.
We did go to the Hermitage. We went to the Hermitage Museum.
I'm an uncultured swine because I'm like, I just want to go back to the hotel room and have a beer and not
as you might art. After you've been lifting for like 10 hours. But yeah, so it was a wonderful experience. I ended up not quite making it through the whole tour. I think I was passing out by the end of that.
Yeah. Well, we realized we could like sneak off. That there was that German guy, remember, who'd sneak off.
Yeah,
because they had beer vendors on the street.
Daniel Hahn. He's still doing. He's still doing. What does he do? Kettlebell Total, I think, is the name of his thing.
He'd run off to go get beers.
Yeah,
and I was like, we can do that.
Which may or may not have been the best idea for us to wander off, because if you recall, we were trying to navigate the subway system.
Oh no, that's a whole story in and of itself. Yeah.
So anyway, long story short, we get lost in Russia. We do make our way back, however. And
well, there was one. So what happened was there was a day they were like, okay, we're going to go and do another tour. And I had work to get done. Right. I was like, I can't, guys. I'm running a business. Like, I have to go back to the hotel. They're like, oh, they were not going to the hotel. I'm like, well, how am I supposed to get there? They're like, go down to the subway and you go down and da-da-da-da-da. And we're like, got it. Past the McDonald's. Nailed it. Mm-hmm. And we get there. And we hadn't navigated the subway yet. And you start going down this staircase. And the subway system in Russia was created in case there was a bombing. Like, it would withstand the bombing.
So it's really deep.
So it's deep. So, like, you're going down, and it looks like the mines of Moria. And, like, you can't see the bottom. You're just on this escalator going into the blackness. I'm looking at Margaux. I'm like, we're so fucked. We're so fucked. And you get down there, and there's a big sign with every language in the world explaining stuff except English, because they're like, fuck you, there's no English. Like, and I was like, and then there's like all these lines and it goes up and down, and we finally figured it out. We're like, okay, sweet, we're there. And we came out, we like went back up out the mine, and we came out and we're like, this is not where we're supposed to be. We're in Russia. We have no idea where we are. We took a subway somewhere. We don't know how to get back to the hotel.
We have a certain amount of cash.
This is not a time that you could look things up on phones. We had a certain amount of cash, of which we stopped to get a beer, because I was like, I need to get a beer. And there's this like funny picture of me like sitting there whistling.
Yeah.
Like, and you snapped this picture because you thought it was funny, and that was like my de-stressing mode. Like I whistled to de-stress, and you were like, haha. Like,
if you can do cutaways on YouTube, I'll send you that picture. I think I still have that picture somewhere.
I was like, not funny. I was like, not funny. This is not funny. We're so fucked. But we did eventually, after hours, find our way back there. Now, that's all the background stuff, guys. The thing that really did transpire there was, it was an amazingly eye-opening experience in a more efficient way of moving your body and lifting. It was like, when I really started getting into it, I realized it was the missing link in a lot of the stuff that I kind of understood, just because I'd been a wrestler, and then I got into CrossFit, and I was just like, there's got to be this link between the two of efficiency, because I know efficiency, I know relaxation with your body and stuff like that, and I couldn't figure out how to convey it. And I always joked that I'm like kind of like a brawler when it came to CrossFitting, because this is what we were doing hardcore at the time. I would just put my head down and I would fucking get it done, and there had to be a better way. And I started seeing it in this sport lifting. I don't know, what was it like you said, it was like the dance, like what like kind of like came across for you when you were looking at the sport lifting?
You know, I think what's important to acknowledge too is that one of your backgrounds was in the RKC, which was very much about, and I like to call it was very kind of like a militant, aggressive, just about maximizing your muscle recruitment. It was, you know, which for a fitness technique is wonderful. But in terms of especially this coming of age, or this renaissance, I guess, of CrossFit competition.
It's a really good way to say it. But just in the fitness industry in general, like, people need to grow. You need to be reinventing yourself. And if you stay stagnant, then you're stagnant, and it's not a good word.
Right. And but just in terms of using kettlebell techniques in competition, it was like, hey, these techniques are really good at making you fit, but they're also great at making you tired. So I think what we kind of recognized about the GS stuff, the Gear Boy Sport stuff, was that it's focusing on efficiency. This can translate beautifully into competition, because you need to be able to, you know, regulate energy, pace, that sort of thing. And that was the bread and butter of GS, was the breathing, the efficiency piece, the fluidity of movement. There's no wasted anything, no wasted movement, no wasted breaths. And, you know, every degree of motion is calculated, essentially, in order to maximize that. So it was just a really cool juxtaposition to some of the hard style stuff that we had kind of been, you know, raised on. Yeah. So,
well, and for me, when at first I was fighting it, I was really fighting it, and in turn I was fighting with Margaux. I was fighting the whole thing. I'd go back to the room, and I'm like, I don't care if they can hear me in the other room. This is bullshit. Like, I don't understand. And I just was stuck in a bad thought process of it, because it took a couple days, and it was a 5-day course. It took a couple days for me, like, to accept what I was seeing. And when I started watching it, and they started demoing more, and just how many repetitions they could do, and how effortless they could make the weight seem, I was just like, it's like watching someone Olympic lift.
Especially
like,
when you
so
see
different.
the size of those guys. We had a guy, I can't come, who was so tiny, and he was doing 70s, like, no problem. And so I think maybe that was a little bit of a paradigm shift in thinking about it, because Gear Boy Sport is kind of a hard thing to get on board with. If you just go watch a competition, you are literally watching a bunch of dudes lined up in spandex on platforms, lifting for 10 minutes straight, and they are suffering. Yeah. And it is a sport, I still believe, you know, after all the research I've done on it, it is about suffering and how you can tolerate that and how you can minimize, and so I think it is a hard thing to get on board with, but I think what was amazing is that you were able to draw from that and translate it into something that was applicable not only to functional fitness in, the broad sense of it, but also to CrossFit competition. So that was kind of the.
When I think that's what ended up getting us too was the suffering. The suffering was what really started speaking to you and me. I was like, okay, this is tough. This is gritty. This is like what we're into. Like,
right.
Like we like this. Now, okay, I'm not good at it. Like I'm not able to do. I'm stronger. I'm fitter. Why aren't I able to do it? So I needed to like get a better understanding. And as I've referenced multiple times in this thing, like because of my BPD, I have a very black and white thinking, which means I have a very addicting personality. So when I settled on this is what we were going to do, I was like, I'm going to go down the rabbit hole and we are going to integrate this into our program. And I integrated it so hard into our training that it went too far. Like, and what I mean by it went too far is like, there's a certain level of mobility that you need for kettlebell sport. Now you can get away with having a certain degree of it and be a good lifter. You can be an excellent lifter with a certain degree of it. But I was like, no, we're all going to get this. We started doing GS stretching drills. We started doing wall walks. We started doing all these things to almost get kind of hypermobility. And I saw that start translating back into my CrossFit athletes with a barbell, and I didn't like that. And I was like, okay, I've gone too far. Now I need to do the old Bruce Lee thing, take what's good and absorb the rest and make your own unique. So I did that. So I was like, what is best about GS? Not when you're on the platform, not when I'm getting someone ready to lift. Like if we're going to sport lift, we're going to sport lift, and that's what we're going to cover. But when I'm talking about, like, I'm using this for, how can I use these thought processes to help a guy that's going through SF selection? How am I going to help this power lifter? And you're like, most of the sport lifters, like, how are you going to do that, Zach? So we looked at the things that were key to success in that without maybe necessarily going down the rabbit hole of the mobility, which was the efficiency of movement, the structural loading, and most of all, the breathing. The breathing was the biggest game changer of all. And I know I even posted up on RX, we're like, hey guys, we're going to be talking about biocentric breathing. Is that, am I saying that right?
Yeah, that's what I like to call it.
That's what you like to call it. Well, I think I've called it biomechanical. Like, Margaux's like going to be very smart here for you guys, and she's going to explain. And that's kind of why I, besides the fact that I'm thoroughly enjoying catching up on all this stuff, because we have so many good stories that get referenced out. As I say at courses, when I talk about like hinging, I'm like, yeah, it's a transverse action of the hip backwards. And I'm like, hey, it's a $10 word. I got a $5 mouth. That's the last time you're going to hear me talk like that. I try and keep things very simple. You hear that on the casts a lot, and I kind of want people to have an understanding of what this breathing is and why we preach it so much. So every year during the Open, we have what we call the Breathe Like a Boss series, where we talk about where these breathing cycles, is what they're called in sport lifting, are integrated into wall balls, rowing. I do breathing cycles when I run. I do it for burpees. I do it for everything. Yeah. And instead of me trying to give like my, barbaric breakdown of it, and like Margaux like squishing her eyes like yeah, kind of, that was cute, that was nice, good job, Zach. I'm just gonna let you kind of talk about it, then maybe I'll jump in at a certain point to like tell you like some of the things that I've used from stuff that you've taught me, because we learned this together, but like, you a doctor. you understand the body in a way that's past what I went at a certain point. I made the choice, and my choice was movement. I was trying to learn everything. I wanted to be fucking the best at everything. And then I was like, you know what? I want to be best at movement. So I stopped maybe some of the complete intricacies of everything down to the minutia of it. So this is a chance for me to reference out to people like, hey, like, you want to hear somebody else say it like eloquently? Then listen to Margaux say
I'll put on my best eloquent hat.
You were supposed to wear your glasses and do this.
I was supposed to, but I think it might be a good opportunity for us to kind of take a step back and like look at the anatomy of the lungs, honestly.
Ooh.
Just because when we talk about why we justify the way we do things, we want to kind of go back to the science of it, right? And so your lungs are basically these sacs, right? And the lungs themselves don't have muscles that open and close them. It's surrounded by your rib cage, by the intercostal muscles. Costal just means ribs, so the muscles that go between the ribs. And the biggest motor is this thing called your diaphragm. It's this big sheet-like muscle that sits above your liver and your spleen. And essentially, the contraction and relaxation of your diaphragm changes the pressure inside your chest. And so when the diaphragm kind of pushes down, it makes more space for you to suck in air. And then when it goes back up, it pushes the air out. And so when you and I are sitting here breathing normally, that's what our diaphragm is doing. It's kind of up and down, up and down. When we're really panting, when we're really breathing deep, you recruit more muscles. You recruit the intercostal muscles, which are the ones in between the ribs. You recruit your sternocleidomastoids, or these muscles here in your neck. And so when you really see someone heaving, you see them really get, more muscle activation in other areas of their body. And it's the same thing we look at, as a physician, when we're looking at someone, we call it work of breathing. If someone is struggling to breathe, we look for the contraction of those muscles. We look for the muscles to contract between the ribs and in the neck and that sort of thing.
Is that like the thing I picked up from your sister, the relax your face thing?
Yeah.
The relax, which is something she used to tell us on the rower 10 years ago before. That's just something I just put together. Like that was, to me, was always just like a relax your face thing. I thought it would slow down your breathing, but that's like kind of an indicator.
Absolutely. And rowing is an amazing, and this kind of gets a little bit into my research, but I thought rowing and kettlebell sport are just two beautiful parallels because it is kind of endurance. I call it a strength-endurance or strength endurance type sport where
strength endurance is what we call it now.
Yeah, there you go. Strength endurance. And so my sister was a rower at UW, and so she was very much also about kind of these how to maximize your energy. And one of the things is don't make it look like you're suffering, right? Relax your face, relax your muscles and the muscles that you're not using exclusively for the activity. So, so essentially when you and I are just sitting here breathing, we're just using that diaphragm. When we're panting, heaving, we're starting to get more muscle recruitment. We're working harder to breathe, meaning we're using more energy to breathe. And when you talk about kettlebell sport, a majority of it, especially when you're pacing, is the rack hold. Mm-hmm. So you're sitting with a pretty significant amount of weight on your chest while you're trying to breathe. And so one of the things that we like to emphasize, at least in efficiency of breathing, is when the weight is coming down on your chest, you exhale. Because the weight is putting pressure on your chest, so it's a natural movement, it's a natural kind of pressure balance to exhale at that time. So that's why we call it biocentric. It's because it's kind of, you're not fighting against the weight, trying to breathe in as you're crushing your chest with these huge weights. And kind of the same principle for when you are doing your lift off, right? Mm-hmm. So the weight's coming off your chest, and so automatically you're kind of taking advantage of that recoil of your chest from having this weight lifted off of them. So then you breathe in. And again, these aren't these huge breaths, right? They're just these little breaths that you're using just in your tidal. We call it just your tidal volume. It's the natural volume that you breathe with, not these big gasping breaths that's going to require more muscle activation. So that's kind of, I think that's kind of the main principle of biocentric breathing, is that you're working with your body, not against it, because that's the way you save energy, is kind of use your natural mechanisms to your advantage.
So I actually just learned a ton from listening to that. I really did.
Awesome.
No, I did. It is stuff I knew, but that was definitely a lot more well laid out for me to have a better understanding. So let's talk out kind of how this might relate to somebody, because I do have a knowledge of the breathing, and I do have a knowledge of the body. I was kind of knocking myself saying I don't, right. But I do. So for like people that are listening to it, and kind of how we talk about this not only applying to kettlebell sport, the way we look at it is if you can do it with kettlebell sport, you can fucking do it with anything.
Oh, absolutely.
Because it is so crushing, and it leaves very small room for error. Now, like something that you mentioned to me too, it's like when you're absorbing force, that is one of the times that you're focusing on this breathing, correct?
Absolutely, yeah. So particularly, you have to think of it like in order to maintain the volume of air in your lungs. And so for a man, and I know we're kind of moving away from this binary thing, but generally for men, you have a total lung volume, including the dead space that doesn't really move air, is about 6 liters. 6 liters of air that you could breathe into your lungs. And for women, it's somewhere between 4.5, 4.2. And so essentially, in order to maintain the volume of air in your lungs, you also kind of have to brace against weight, right? But think about, and so in order to brace, you contract muscle. And so thinking about, okay, what if I don't brace? What if I let the air come out naturally and I just absorb the force of when you absorb force, you let the air come out? That's another way to save energy.
So one of the ones that I use, because when we teach the 1.0 Instructor RX course, I don't get much time to talk about it. It's not enough time to talk. You know how talking about breathing cycles is a whole thing, and the amount of content we do. But I kind of talk them through it, and then one of the big ones is actually, I think it might have been the write-up you did. There was one write-up that I was like, I need this write-up from you. To post up, because I'm explaining, and some people are like, I don't understand online.
Yeah, I think it was an Instagram post like comment or something like that. Yeah.
Well, so I think it was the double under one, and the double, and like when I explain double unders to people, it makes so much more sense, because I talk about the kind of breathing, and I'm like, the absorption of force that you have is when your feet contact the ground.
Exactly.
And so I'll show it to them, and I'll be like, when they're jumping, they're like with their feet, and they're like, oh yeah, I know that kind of breathing. And I'm like, that is not a breathing cycle per se, but it is an example of how to have that relaxed breathing.
Right.
Now, the breathing cycle itself, which is the biocentric breathing, is a series of breaths you put together for certain movements to help keep your heart rate down, so you don't go all lactic-y as well. Because especially in sport, and why it's so important to learn how to do this for sport, if you blow up and you have to set the bells down, that's it. It's over. Like that's the end. And it's something that you can see too in CrossFit competitions, when people have overused their breathing, and they are done, and they start slowing down. They have to put their hands on their knees. They're taking the big belly breaths. Like everything is screwed up. In fact, a really interesting throwback person, because especially because we've been doing this so long, was Lucas Parker. Lucas Parker used to do breathing cycles. Yeah, he didn't know it, but he would do it. You'd watch him, and he'd be doing like the kind of puff breathing, and it did look like Gimli, from like, it's all about the breathing. Like it definitely looked like that when he was doing it, but it was that kind of that puffed breathing. And so when we teach people how to utilize this, we're like, if you guys can get this from the absorption of force while you're doing it, you can recorrelate this to your other movements. Like in a wall ball, you hit the bottom of the squat, you're breathing out. When you come up and you release the weight, you're breathing out. When you catch the weight and you're again absorbing load into your body, you're breathing out. And when people look at me, they're like, well, why? And then I'm like, well, intercostal muscles and breathing and momentary interruptions of oxygen flow, because that's something big Jeff talks about too. Because when you do that and you kind of hold your breath, it does cause you to have an interruption of oxygen flow. Am I wrong on that?
Yeah, I mean,
you could shoot me straight here.
Yeah, no. When you talk about oxygen flow, really what you're talking about is the perfusion, which is another $10 word, which basically means that's
like 12, girl.
Exchange.
You need change with that 10 to get there.
Yeah. So oxygen is a gas, and it goes from the air to your blood. And the space in between is the oxygen perfusing into the blood. And so it does that across a barrier, i.e. your lung, your alveoli, the little sacs that make up, the kind of the actual workhorse of the lung. And so that's the flow you're kind of talking about. And so, yes, if you're not breathing, the oxygen exchange is not necessarily happening. So, yeah.
Well, and the thing about it is this style of training completely changed myself as an athlete. We just did a podcast I don't even know if this one's published up, but we actually kind of went into the change that we've seen with the CrossFit season and stuff like that. You're like, you know what? Hey, man, I put like 8 years into that and gathered a bunch of injuries, and I hate thinking people it's just kind of going by the wayside. So when we are talking about this, we are kind of talking about, you know, CrossFit in general with the breathing, but I have taught this breathing as well to JITS players, all kinds of people that end up being in positions where they are being crushed by weight. My firefighters, a lot of my lady firefighters, when they're getting used to working with that stuff, I teach them breathing cycles to help keep their air down, especially if they're working tanks and they're not used to doing that and they're going to bleed their tank out quick. Learning how to have that controlled breathing is such a big thing, especially when you're laboring under force and you're not used to having this equipment on and things along those lines. So it goes across a bunch of things. And the reason I referenced out, you know, the CrossFit thing was because it changed my energy system. Like I was able to become a different athlete, where as before I was very much a brawler athlete, like 90 seconds to 7 minutes. I was a fucking rock star.
Yeah.
12 minutes, the wheels start rattling. 5, I've definitely lost a wheel. 20, this shit is, you know, like that's it. But learning how to be efficient in my moving and take that brawling mentality and slow down my breathing, not necessarily slow down my movement per se, but match my breathing to my movement, allowed me to kind of have that, you know, steady state that now I like doing 30-minute workouts. And when I'm doing a 30-minute workout, it's not, oh, I'm doing a 30-minute workout and I'm doing this and that. Like it's a lot of high output work that I'm doing inside those time frames. And that was something really big for me. And when I start talking to athletes about building this bigger aerobic base, you know, that's one of the, and, you know, people are like, oh, you just need to spend more time in zone 1, zone 2. I mean, you do some OPEX work. You've heard all about this kind of stuff, and people talking about like slower steady state and, you know, and slower steady state will build a bigger aerobic base, but you know, sitting on a fucking bike is boring as shit. Right? You can't, it's boring as shit. You can get into the steady state too through kettlebell utilization of work where you're not necessarily going into this maximally tensioned position and doing what would be called power breathing, where like locking up your whole body and doing all this stuff. But you can use that in conjunction with things like rowing and running and things like that to help build out this bigger base. It's like, it's not a weird thing in our gym to have like workouts where there's like 75 swings, and I'm like, oh, you guys are doing like Russian swings. I'm like, you're doing it unbroken. Everyone's like, yeah, man, probably I should definitely do that unbroken, because they understand the mechanics, but mostly they also understand the breathing, so that they can take off. Even the workout we're doing today, we've been working on getting faster on the bike and like on the airdyne. Nobody wants to be fast on the fucking airdyne, but like over the weeks I've been like, speed up your mechanics. And while they're speeding up their mechanics, I'm having them focus on their breathing and expanding their lungs, so there is a constant steady flow of oxygen and they're not blowing up. And it's today they're kind of testing out and they're having a lot of success. And it's that learning of the breathing. It's so big to so many people. And when I talk about that, I'm like, first you got to learn the kettlebell movements, because if you're not doing those right, you're not going to be able to put yourself in a position that you need the breathing. If you can't do 10 reps, the breathing ain't going to fucking help you anyways. You can't do fucking 10 reps. But if we're talking about 20 reps, 30 reps, 45 reps, something along those lines, you're like, oh shit. And you're getting into that muscular endurance and in that strength endurance zone where you need to be able to breathe. And it's the exact same thing with CrossFit. CrossFit is strength endurance. I know there's maximal outputs and heavy weights and stuff like that, but the idea is sustainability over time. And the best people in the field, they look at Matt Frazier's or Rich Froning's. I like watching Rich. He moves really well. They move very well, and their breathing always looks like it's very under control. It's very under control.
So if there's anything that we really take from it is you know, breathing also requires muscles, and the main muscle is the diaphragm. So you flex the diaphragm, you activate the diaphragm when you breathe in, because when it flexes, it goes down. So it makes that space in your chest cavity. And so that's kind of the main principles. Even breathing takes muscle. And so when you control your breathing, you maximize your breathing with exhalation, which is always something I like to think about in terms of when you're really doing your and when you exhale like that, it's almost like the inhale, the recoil is effortless. So I think that's a big thing. And you want the inhale to be effortless because that's the thing that takes the energy, because the diaphragm is the master of that. So
that's kind of like so anybody that's been to the course, when you're hearing her talking about that effortless thing, that's that like positive reventilation I talk about. When you breathe and your body will naturally take that air back in if you're focusing on the breathing, but you have to have the understanding.
Right.
If you're blowing out real tight, it's not going to want to naturally reventilate.
Right.
It's not going to have that effect. So you got to have that kind of passiveness to it. And I know it doesn't sound like the thing you want to think about when you're in the middle of a workout and you're fucking dying. You're fucking dying, man.
Yeah.
You know, it's the last thing you want to think about, but it's like constantly. And, you know, it's funny because we talk about like the Attitude Era, like going way back to the beginning of this. We had an understanding of the importance of, I mean, we knew about the importance of breathing, and your sister would talk about, you know, relaxing your face and stuff. But I mean, I'm sure you can remember me coaching you through volume sets, because we did a lot of volume sets where I would be literally telling you to slow down your breathing, and like I'm like, you're overextending your stomach, you have to like slow down.
Yeah.
And like we had this concept of it, but when I saw someone had, not just someone, but a whole group of people, and they write papers and shit about this in Russia and
Right.
University of Sport and Education,
Yes.
and but like people had perfected it, figured out the science behind it. And when I saw that, I saw a way that we could take that, integrate it into something else. And that's a mistake I see some people make that are super sport, and they're like, this is the only way to do it, and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, no, you can integrate that into strength training. You can integrate that into actual sport, not just anyone that tells me like, you're going to, like, if you long cycle, you're going to be a better football player. Or you're going to be a better wrestler. I'm like, that's fucking bullshit. It's not. But if you can take principles behind the movements and not just focus on becoming a better long cycler, but the ideas and the movements and relaxation, fixation, things along those lines, you can translate skill sets from that back into sport aspects.
Absolutely. And that's, I mean, from the very beginning, that's kind of one of the concepts of cross training.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, it's just, it's fostering a more skilled neuromuscular connection is your ability of your brain to tell your muscles what to do at a very basic level. And that translates into coordination, you know, which translates to skill, and skill translates to efficiency, I think. So, yeah, absolutely.
Well, yeah, I mean, and that's such a big thing behind it. And it's the breathing. It's why I wanted to have this on here, so people could hear that. And I'm definitely going to have you on again to talk about this with AJ too, because her brain, she wants more.
Yeah.
She wants more from me. I'm like, that's enough. That gives me what I want to know on my level, like grunt level. Like, yeah, now I have the better understanding of it. Something I maybe already kind of knew, but I have even a better understanding of it. That's kind of the idea behind that. And this is like a starting point, guys. Like what we do with RX and the style, it's constantly evolving. The movements are constantly evolving. We're adding in new lifts. We're talking about the heavy hinge versus a moderate hinge. We're talking about how to activate the posterior chain in a certain way or lessen it in a different way. And the breathing is a huge part about it too. And just getting the breathing and be able to talk on that is huge. And you know, I'm like a masterclass coach with it, and I still feel like I could be better at talking the talk with somebody when they have more questions about it. I can explain it and be like, get them to understand through movement as they're doing it. I'm like, try it. And they feel their heart rate go down, and they feel that they themselves become more comfortable. But I always tell people the answer is not because Zach said so. Like, I like to be able to give people more information. So that's totally helpful for me too. And hopefully it helps anybody that's listened to this or has ever gotten a hold of me and been like, I don't understand. Here's not only someone that's a doctor, all right, but has also come up through kind of the renaissance of like the fitness industry of what we've seen with CrossFit to where it's become now, was a sport lifter too. Like, I talked to some of these people that are getting into sport in the last 5 years, and I'm like, bro, we've been doing this a lot longer than like, we're already over it. I'm already past like your excited phase of like, this is my life and I'm going to be a sportsman. I'm like, bro, I'm already over that. I found the good things I like about it.
Yeah, the longevity. I think it's picking up those pieces it's going to make you a lifelong sportsman rather than just a pedal to the metal type. So, I think it's good things to carry on.
Oh yeah, well, I'm super pumped that we were actually able to get that all covered out, and we got a couple more minutes here. So,
I think one of the things I've realized as I'm babbling on and saying all these fancy words is I didn't do an amazing job of qualifying why I should be even talking about this.
Well, hit me.
So,
I'm checking to see if we have any questions.
yeah,
I put a thing up
absolutely.
saying if anybody had any questions.
Yeah.
So go ahead and hit.
So I did a bachelor's in biology, and after that I kind of had you talked about this in one of your episodes, I had my meathead phase where I was really just focusing on strength and conditioning, and did tactical athlete, also did RKC, and then moved into this gear voice sport, going to Russia stuff, and I decided I kind of wanted to make it legit. And so I went and did a master's in kinesiology at the University of British Columbia. And so my research there was focused primarily on VO2 max in the context of gear voice sport and rowing. And so that's kind of where I'm coming from in terms of how I'm describing and talking about things. And of course, also as a medical resident now, I have a little bit more of a clinical perspective on it as well. But that's kind of where I'm coming from in terms of my background as well. So,
Well, I think that could be the follow up too when we get you back in. Obviously, the bullshittery and talking about it, and I'm sure AJ will dig into like, tell me about this dumb shit that you guys used to talk about. But getting into your paper too, like, and I just knew there would be not enough time to get into that. Not with like the idea, we kind of laid the groundwork here, and then I really would like to get into that, because one of the things when I go out and teach the courses and I talk about our single bell LP and stuff, I usually tell people to snatch. That's I'm like, biggest bang for your buck. I'm like, snatching is going to be the way to go, and like you have this whole write up on the whole thing. So I really would like to be able to get people to have that kind of understanding to it too. Because, we talk tomfoolery on this cast and, soapbox and shit, but we didn't get to a point to play. Like, there's some people that fucking make podcasts just to fucking listen to themselves talk. I feel like there's enough information that needs to get out to people. That's why we do it.
yeah.
Now, since we have a couple more minutes here, jackassery. All right. I'm sure if everybody's been listening to it and they're like, God, they were so funny in the beginning, and then they were getting super serious because they were talking about the thing. I'm actually really passionate about the same kind of thing. Like, and I just loved hearing Margaux Go, as we call her too, talk about that kind of stuff. But if you were to look back at the Attitude Era, so your early inception, because here's a funny thing, and I'm not going to name names on this, but like we run into people like AJ and I, like in the Seattle area.
Yeah.
And they're like, how'd that person know you? I'm like, oh, I'm their grand coach.
Coach.
And they're like, what? I'm like, yeah, I coached Margaux and Margaux coached them, and I'm by proxy their grand coach.
I love that.
I know. I'm like, and she's like, you have all these fucking, and I'm like, yeah, and that's why we do like the internship program and stuff too, because it's something, my rougher edges aside, I do have a tendency to get people to become good coaches, and not hard asses, but good at what they do. What if you were to look back at the Attitude Era? What was one of your favorite things to look back on that whole thing?
God, there were so many good one-liners that you had that are escaping me at this point. But I think. Are you talking memories, or are you just talking general concepts?
How about we do this? Because like the one-liners, that's the scary thought. I had to take shit my coach says down because I said some foul.
God, I forgot about shit my coach says.
I said some fucking shit in the gym that wow.
Oh yeah.
That was full Attitude Era. But like if there was like a training session or just something where you're like this, because like at a certain point, it wasn't just like I like kettlebells. There had to be like a selling point that like put you in, and you're like, I can get with this training. I'm gonna follow this guy down the rabbit hole until and this is the same thing I say about all my coaches, and obviously Gogo's a doctor now, so she's not a coach. But she was doing some coaching and things along those lines. But everybody I work with, like they're meant to go on. Like they're not meant to stay. Like the idea is that they go forth. But there has to be a point where I didn't like fire you or release you or something like that, where you like, I would like to learn from this person because of blank. And it maybe not like some like big monumentous thoughtful thing, but like even a funny thing, like, okay, I got it.
I think so many, oh God, there's several things that come to mind, but one, you know, I remember, I think from the start, before I even owned lifting shoes and we were back squatting barefoot and, you know, like at 6 a.m, I remember, because I went to like the 5 a.m. class or something like that. And I think just absorbing the enthusiasm that you had at 6 a.m. for something, that in itself is an infectious thing. I think that's one of the things that kind of kept me coming back just as a client, right? And then when I started really getting into, you know, developing skill, developing strength and that sort of thing, I remember we had, I forget what you called them, but it was the first time we did like the 50 rep max thing as like an in-gym competition.
Oh, the combine.
Yeah, the combine. And I remember you were like coaching, you were standing next to me, coaching me through it. And I remember I was like at 48 or something, and you freaking threw your chair, you were sitting on a chair next to me in the squat next to the squat rack. And you stood up and you threw the chair back and you were just like, you are not dropping that bar. And I was like, absolutely. Anything you said at that time was like the truth. And it was a really powerful moment, I think, in just my coming of age as a lifter. And so being able to establish that sort of bond with someone, even now I'm kind of working on it as the doctor-patient relationship, but the coach and athlete relationship, it's sacred, right? And you were the first person that really, showed me how powerful that could be, because, you know, coaches so often know the potential of their athlete before they do, and helping them to realize it is just, it, you know, gives you goosebumps. I think it's just a really cool thing.
You know, it's funny, we still talk about trying to build that with coaches, and we what we call it now is like your coaching identity. It's like coaches trying to find that way to connect with the athletes and their other coaches or the coaches that they're mentoring. And it just ended up being a really big thing for me. And like one of my things I remember for you was because I used to teach like 18 classes a day, but one of them was our foundation class. And I think it was after 6, so you would get done training, and then I would go into, actually maybe we had a 7 o'clock class too. I think the 8 o'clock was foundation. I think it was like 6 o'clock I'd teach the class, 7 o'clock you'd go get coffee or something, and you'd come back and I'd teach the 8 o'clock foundation class, and you'd sit on the stoop next to the platform. There was like a little like office, and you'd watch me teach, and you learn and you'd absorb, and then at a certain point I had you start demoing and stuff like that. And I remember thinking at the time, I was like, okay, this is what I wish I had as a coach. I wish I'd had someone to really care enough to take me through this stuff. And that really set a precedent on how I moved forward, not just as because I was a rough around the edges coach, because I wanted the best for everybody. Like I cared enough about everybody that I wanted them to have the best, but for the people that I wanted to mentor and really cared about, it was give them everything I can and teach them how to be the best coach, not just in the movement or their speech, but in that connection standpoint, and then let them go. And I can't tell you how proud I am of you now. Like, I'm coming in and being like, fucking, do I call you doctor? Like, if I can call you doctor? I was like, we did the White Nights tour in Russia, and we were drinking red vodka on a boat, you know?
Oh, Lord.
Yeah, that's for another. We'll tell that story when AJ's here. But I think that covers about what we got for the day. I really want to tell you I appreciate you making your busy schedule.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
To come on down here to South Park and get that in. Hopefully everybody, biocentric or biomechanical or whatever word I butcher it whenever I say it, I try and stay with the smartest people in the room most of the time. So you usually will catch me saying biocentric. Sometimes I fall back on my old vernacular. But Margaux will be back on the cast. AJ was very bummed that she was going to miss it, and this was just the one time that happened to line up. So, and you know, it was just good for us to get a chance to get caught up too, especially because you were like my first intern coach. So, and it's cool to see because like people go on, they open gyms, people become firefighters, they do all kinds of different things with their life, but I hope they just get something from the time they had with us. So I'm glad to see that still rings true. And I really look forward to having you back. So AJ's not here, so I'll tap this out on my own here, guys. Remember, when all else fails, fresh tactics.